Well, good morning. Good to see a lot of you. And if you don't like the landscaping, we'll talk to Ken when he gets back. I guess we'll blame it on him. But um, glad there was no injuries or anything. I'm sure it was pretty shocking to him to sit in his office and then car plows through that sign. But it's probably a good thing the sign was there because he may have ended up in here with Ken. So, and in that sense, it's a blessing. So, um, but at any rate, well, wish him the best in Odessa. You got me this morning. So we're in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Paul is still, he's been defending himself off and on the whole time through this book. And chapter 10, he went through that again, was defending his ministry and what he had done, and then those that were critiques of his or critics of his. And he's kind of given an answer to a lot of those critiques. And then when we come to chapter 11, uh, if we back up just a minute, where he's in chapter 18, he said, let the one, in verse 17, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. For it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends. So he kind of caps off that little bit of argument saying they can boast all they want to, but what matters is who the Lord boasts in, who the Lord approves, instead of, if I approve of myself, say I'm very approved of myself and the things I do, that doesn't matter, right? What matters is the Lord approving of it. Kind of like the joke. One of my favorite jokes is, "I'm the most humble guy I know," you know, and that's kind of what they were talking about here. Is I'm the most holy guy I know. I'm so humble and don't boast at all. And then they were doing the opposite. So, and that brings us in here in chapter 11, where Paul kind of starts off here, and he's going to get into them being false apostles. You know, uh, basically we kind of don't know exactly what they were claiming, but we do by his response that they were trying to say they were the same kind of apostle as Paul or Mark or Matthew or any of those, that or Peter, uh, and he's got to address that with them. They had evidently been causing a lot of trouble here in Corinth. So um, he says there in verse 1, I wish you would bear with me in a little foolishness. Do bear with me, for I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. So he kind of starts out here, and again, a little sarcasm, I think, in what Paul's saying. For some people, that may not be as helpful. For me, it helps quite a bit because I speak sarcasm, right? So he's like, just bear with me a little bit while I speak a little foolishness. And he's just saying, I'm sorry I have to say this. It's so silly, but I have to address it, this foolishness that's going on. And so he says, when I brought you to Christ, I married you to Christ. Uh, and so he wants what's the best for them. And if you've ever been the officiating party or whatever, when you marry someone, I've done it twice, you really hope they do well. You have a vested interest in them doing well and their marriage going well. Just the same as if you baptize someone. You have an extra, I don't know if investment's the right word, but you were part of that and you wish them the best and you want to see them do well. So you maybe keep up with them a little more to see how they're doing. And he's like, look, I was the one that married you in this, Christ to the church and brought them to you. Um, so he really wants the best for them above what he would because he was involved in all that. So he's just reminding them, look, I'm not saying this because I just want to talk or cause trouble or whatever. I said, I brought you to Christ. All of my intentions and all my hopes are for you to just stay true to God. And that's what he's trying to do here, just help them do that. So he says there in verse 3, he says, but I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. So he says it out loud. He says, I'm afraid that that Satan has deceived you and led you away from Christ. That's a pretty rough thing to have to say to somebody flat out to their face. And a lot of people get mad about that or resent that. But he just flat out tells them here, he says, I'm afraid that Satan has deceived you and led you away from Christ. Um, led you away from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. We can have an insincere devotion to Christ. You ever seen that? See it quite a bit. People all pomp and circumstance and always, oh, I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed. And they put it as a front to everyone. And there's a lot of people that have an insincere love of Christ. And maybe a devotion to Christ, but that's not the same thing as a pure devotion. I don't think it's an accident. He uses those words here. He says a pure devotion. And when it's a pure devotion, it's not driven or affected by worldly things, as we're going to see here with these false prophets. They have other things driving them to be teachers, right? But it's not out of a pure devotion. It may be for money, it may be for a little bit of fame, it may be for a little this, a little that. And there may be a little devotion in there to Christ, but that's not all. And what God requires is a pure devotion. Other than that, it's a little bit polluted, isn't it? When I want to drink a water, I want pure water. I don't want a bunch of other stuff in there that can be harmful, right? So we want purity. And that's what spirituality, what religion and all that should be, is pure and a pure devotion. Yeah?
Going over and going over is that he's trying to reinforce here is that his concern for them is not anything, not because it's a feather in his cap, not because it's more money for him, not because it gives him anything for himself. It's, this is why I care about you, and trying to kind of come at it another angle for him. Like, okay, everything I haven't said already, how much I care about you and why. I've said it this way. I've said it this way. I'm going to try and say it another way here, so maybe you'll get it through your thick heads this time.
Yeah. Yeah, it in a way it's almost like a parent talking to their child. Like, look, I'm telling you and I want you to do these things because I love you. Not because I just, like getting onto you or whatever or all those things. He's like, because I love you is why I'm telling you this. So verse 4 here, he says, for if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough. So he says here, if someone proclaims another Jesus, that happens quite a bit, doesn't it? They all claim it's the same Jesus, just their version of Jesus' teaching. Well, if it's not pure and if it's not correct, as Christ said and as Jesus has said and told us to do and the things that he's laid out, it's not Jesus. It's another one. And so they want to have a version, but it's not. It's not, it's like when you get your phone updated, they want to say, iPhone whatever 2.0 or 2.1. Well, it's the same one. It's just got a little 0.1 on the end of it. It's pretty much the same. It could be totally different. But what do you know? It's just 2.1, right? Oh, well, this is Jesus. It's Jesus 83,000.52. And they say it's the same thing. No, we need the 1.0, the original, the only Jesus teaching. Anything else is another one. It's not the same Jesus. And we cannot be deceived. And Satan certainly wants to deceive and deceive in that way in any way he can, but we need to understand it's a different one. It's not the same Jesus.
Yeah. A lot of people that this has gone on for decades because I remember talking to a man who went with the queer persuasion, and was claimed to be like a religious person, and when I confronted him about it, he says, "Well, the God I know is full of love, and He wouldn't condemn someone because of this." And the God you know is different from the God. That's what they did say though, and the God I know.
9 times out of 10, whatever they were saying God wouldn't do, you could read where he did. Oh, God does it. Let's take homosexuality. Oh, God wouldn't condemn that. Do, do you not get the first little bit of your Bible where he, destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah and all that because of that? Well, yeah, he certainly condemns it. But they find ways around it. So that's not, again, it's not the same Jesus when they have all these other teachings. Glenn?
Do you think Paul might have thought that this group that still opposed him was going to be the ones that was going to come in and try to do this?
I don't know. It's hard to think about all the I would say threats from all over the world uh, that were coming at the church. And when Paul and the apostles go out there and establishing these congregations and going out with the gospel, uh, so many places and so many different people would want to just start their own thing and hangers on, if you will. There's always a movement. If you want to look at this as a movement, people always want to, especially people like these false teachers, always want to come in, with it and profit from it and say they're part of this movement and they're part of this group. And then you have the actual, people driven by Satan who want to try and crush it and destroy it. And so I think it's hard for him to know, without the Spirit involved. It was probably hard for him to know from where all this stuff was going to happen. I'm sure he knew it was going to happen, but in what way, But then also, I can't speak for what the Holy Spirit was telling him and letting him know all of these things. I'm sure it was to help him out and combat all this.
If we have someone come in off the street and start teaching something that's wrong, we have book, chapter, and verse, and we can say, look, you're wrong. What you're saying doesn't agree. They didn't have that. And so what he did is like, if they're saying something that doesn't match up with what I've already taught you, that's wrong. Use me as the pattern. Well, that's what we need to do too. We're doing the same thing, just they didn't have the written word to go by. But, we're much more fortunate than they were in that.
Yeah. And it was very important for him to say, if there's anything else that I taught you, like, it stops right here, right? That's the last version you need. That's the last thing you heard was where it stops. There's no new updates, right? There's no new anything after that. This is what the gospel is, and that's how it stays. Um, to your point, if there's anything else in what they say, he says here at the end of all of that, a different gospel from anyone you accepted, and you put up with it readily enough. When they came and started saying all these things, evidently they just kind of allowed it and just put up with it. And he's telling them, don't do that. Don't just put up with it.
This is another one of those things I think that it's easy for me at least to be really hard on the Corinthians because we've got 2,000 years since there was a new gospel. They basically, some of these people didn't know anything. Some of them were finally accepted by God that were Gentiles. Some of them spent thousands of years understanding Jewish doctrine. And so there just was a new thing. Not very long back at all. Dad remembered whenever this happened. So something new starts getting talked about again. Okay, well, is this okay? Are we supposed to do this too? Is this true? Is this guy talking? Well, no. For us, it's really easy. Like Larry said, not only do we have book, chapter, and verse, we've got generations and generations and generations of precedent of no, it doesn't change. They just had a major change in who could believe what, who was accepted by whom, and so something new comes around. And okay, well, is this or not? Like they're in a tighter spot than we are as far as what they were experienced with listening to you and changing what that meant.
Yeah, like I was saying, it's really hard to try to put ourselves in their shoes with the gospel being new and everything else. It wasn't like you could phone somebody. You could, is this what you really meant? Or, send a quick letter. Letters, you had to actually send somebody. Give them some traveling money and whatever and send them to go take that letter to them, kind of thing. So, uh, yeah, it's easy to be hard on them, but also in a lot of ways, it's amazing that they come out as well as they did with all the pressures and all the schemes and all the, I think, I don't want to ever say put yourself in Satan's shoes, but think about what just happened. Christ was sacrificed. He's like, yes. And then Christ is resurrected, and he's like, oh no. All of his schemes and all his things were just defeated. And then now the church is spreading, the gospel is spreading, and he's like, oh, I got another chance to just cause more destruction. And so he is pulling out all the stops here to try to do what he can to crush the start of the church here in the early part. And he's doing everything he can. And all of his people in his pocket and everything else. So they got that against him as well. And so do we. And a lot of times we forget about that. That it's all society this and society that. There's also the devil behind it. It's behind it. He's working every day. It's not just, society or what culture may be or whatever. He's happy to have a demonic culture if he can make it happen where you're at. And we can't put up with it, like he's saying here. We have to push back against it. So, verse 5, he says, indeed, I consider that I am not the least inferior to these superior apostles, or not superior, super apostles. Does anyone have anything else there besides super apostles? Eminent apostles? Okay. Then you had this thing that evidently this air that they're the bestest apostles, right? Paul's okay, but we're better than Paul. And in my version it says super apostles, and of course what comes to mind is, all these superhero movies. And they're kind of like the actor that when they say action, he starts to do the thing, and when it gets to the dangerous stuff, they say, okay, cut. And then the Mr. Super Apostle steps aside, and the stuntman comes in and actually does the dangerous stuff. Gets punched or falls off the building or whatever, breaks a leg trying to make it look really great. That's Paul. He's the real apostle. Taking all the slings and arrows and everything else, and these are just actors. They're just acting like they're apostle and like they're the greatest apostle and how awesome they are when they're not really doing the real thing. They're just actors. So he says, even if I am, verse 5, he says, I consider that I am not in the least superior or inferior to these super apostles. Even if I am unskilled in speaking, I am not so in knowledge. Indeed, in every way, we have made this plain to you in all things. So he said, he admits here, this has kind of been a critique he's been fighting the whole time. He admits here, I'm unskilled in speaking. But that doesn't mean I don't know what I'm talking about. And what that brings to mind is most people are not skilled speakers in the church, anywhere. And in the church, when we come to Christ and we're like, we want to start doing, opening prayers, and we get nervous about that because I'm not a skilled speaker and everything. Paul, if you remember, a lot of the critique for him up to this point is they said, well, in your letters you speak boldly and all of these things, and then when you're in person, you're not. That's because he wasn't a skilled speaker in person, but he was a good writer. And one lesson, kind of a sidebar we can learn from that is, like, again, let's say I'm young and I'm trying to learn how to do an opening prayer or whatever. Write it down. When you write things down, you can kind of organize your thoughts and say it in the best way possible. And that's what Paul did when he sent his letters. He's like, how do I want to say this? How, what I can say this better. And then what gets written down is the best way he can say it. David in the Psalms, those are prayers that he's basically written down. So when we're trying to think what we want to say in an opening prayer or at a funeral, something like that, or a wedding, do not be afraid at all to write down what you would want your prayer to be and work that out. I think we've pushed back so much from things like Hail Marys and all that, the just rote memorization of a prayer that I think it was Paul warned against, that we go the other way and, well, I can't memorize nothing. I'm just got to say it. And there's an in-between where we can write it down and we can gather our thoughts, and then so we can do the best prayer possible that we can do. And there's some people that write them down, and when you're doing a prayer, they do it because they want to remember it and do it right.
I just read, for I consider that I'm not inferior to the most eminent apostles, even though I am untrained in speech, yet I am not in knowledge. I'm trained in knowledge because of my background, but I'm not trained in speech. Who of the apostles were? None of them were. You had fishermen, you name it, none of them were. And the fact that he's contending with those who would be considered eminent, we go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. For it has been declared to me concerning you, my brethren, by those of Chloe's household, that there are contentions among you. Now I say this, that each of you says, well, I'm of Paul, or I'm of Apollos, or I'm of Cephas or Peter. So they're picking and choosing who they think is preeminent there. So he's continuing a thought that was even in the first letter in the first chapter when he began writing.
Yeah.
But of all the apostles that had any ability, he would have had ability. The others are tradesmen.
Yeah.
And as the years and decades go by, and by this time, if there's one that was considered eminent, it was James, who was in Jerusalem. But he's not even mentioned either one of these letters.
You mean James, the brother of Jesus? Yeah. If anybody had any polish, it would have been Paul, because he was taught formally, the Jewish law and everything growing up. But when you're talking and teaching to Greeks who have these Greek philosophers running around, and all their whole life is just saying things that sound pretty and polished, right? That's what he's dealing with. So in comparison to the Greek philosophers that had the most flowers, in their speech that anybody could ever have, he sounds unskilled and doesn't know what he's talking about. And he's reminding them here, hey, I have all the knowledge that you could have. I maybe can't say it like you would want it said, but it's the truth, what he does say. So what he does say is the truth. And he says, in every way we made this plain to you in all things. So I'm always reminded of the saying, the harsh truth is way better than a pretty lie. There's no way a lie is it good in any way, and the harsh truth is better, even though it may be harsh.
There's a good chance he might be sarcastic in his speech here.
It could.
He's dealt with so much, and we know he's probably the most educated person around through his past and his Pharisees.
Yeah, certainly in the law. Yeah, and I think, and this is just my, hypothetical guess here, is he's dealing with these Greeks that were philosophers and everything else, and then here comes this new Christianity thing, and they want to jump on board, and they bring their whole speech thing with it, and all of a sudden, I'm a Christian, and the next thing it'll come through, well, there'll be that. But yeah, he's certainly very skilled in his knowledge and teaching and everything, and he's like, yeah, I'm not the polished speaker they are.
Paul made the comment in another verse that he had learned to become all things to all people. He's staying at their level. He's not going in there, I got it, you don't. What they got is Christ. being a little sarcastic with him, why are we going down this road?
He certainly did a good job. So you had in Corinth a mix of Hebrews and Gentiles. And these Hebrews had come to Christ, but they still had this attitude of they were better than the Gentiles when it comes to Christianity. And Paul could have easily fell in the trap of, yeah, I'm one of you guys. I'm kind of the better class of Christians. And from what we can tell, from what I can tell, at every turn, he tried to appeal to the Gentiles just as much, if not more, than what the they were called the Judaizers were.
When it called Peter.
Yeah. He certainly checked Peter for doing that. And so he, to your point, he certainly made an effort to be on their level and wherever they were, and because the gospel fits anybody anywhere. I'm convinced it doesn't matter what the culture is, what you're taught. The gospel will fit you. And too many times people try to make the gospel fit that instead of it, making it fit you, but it will. And that Paul was certainly really good at that. So he comes here, and then in verse 7, he says, I did not commit a sin in humbling myself so that you might be exalted, because I preached God's gospel to you free of charge. So he's bringing up the thing here, am I not one of those super apostles because I didn't charge you money to teach you? Is that one of the qualifications of this super apostle or this eminent apostle, is that you got to charge you money and you just got to pay me? He said, I robbed other churches by accepting support from them in order to serve you. So quite a humbling to me. If I heard this on the other end, I would be, that would cut to the quick. He robbed other churches so he could teach them. And then, again, as Ken says, we don't know the letters in Grandma's attics, what they were saying here. Well, you didn't even charge us nothing. Are you really an apostle? Paul, when he came through and taught, we didn't even have to give you any money here. Does that mean are you any good? You get what you pay for.
Well, the founding fathers, if you go back and study that, these false teachers charge.
Yeah, it was all about money. Right. It's all about money and furthering themselves. So he reminds them here that I robbed other churches to be able to come and serve you. And they were, in a lot of cases, they were churches in areas that were not as wealthy as Corinth here. So that's quite a humbling or a rebuke that they should be humbled by. That I took money from other people, didn't have it, to be able to serve you, and now you're, we'd say nowadays, you're copying this attitude, right? So he says in verse 9, he says, and when I was with you and was in need, I did not burden anyone. For the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied my need. So he reminds me, I was there and I needed something. I was in need. I didn't tell you because he didn't want to burden him with it. He had people come all the way from Macedonia to help him out. So again, this is part of this thing where he starts out here. Okay, if you want to go there, they're talking about these super apostles or whatever and what they do and say and everything. All right, if you want to go there, we'll go there. And he tells them, you know what? I was there and I had a need and I didn't even ask you for it. Others came and provided. So if you want to know, now you know. So he says, the second part of that verse is, oh, I refrained and will refrain from burdening you in any way. As the truth of Christ is in me, this boasting of mine will not be silenced in the regions of Achaia. And why? Because I do not love you. God knows I do. So he's just saying, again, yeah, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing to help you and everyone around there be saved and come to Christ. And it's because I do love you. And in verse 12, he says, and what I'm doing, I will continue to do in order to undermine the claim of those who would like to claim that in their boasted mission, they work on the same terms as we do. So, he said, what he just laid out in that I'm not taking money from you. He said, you know what? I'm going to continue doing that. I'm going to continue taking money from other people to help support you, because I'm going to undermine these so-called apostles' claim that I'm doing it just for money. And so I'm not. Will continue not taking money, just to refute their claims. And he says, because they have boasted that they're on the same serve on the same conditions that I do. And you know, this starts bringing up under the same conditions. One, they're doing it for money. Two, he starts getting into his suffering as an apostle. He's going to say, okay, they say they're on the same terms as an apostle as me. Let's go down a list of who suffered who, or who suffered what, and let's see what their list is. Theirs is, to paraphrase, theirs is they didn't get the free continental breakfast at the hotel in the morning, and they're mad about it. And Paul's like, I'm over here in the ditch trying to not get killed, overnight. Adam?
Which is again one of those things we haven't grown past either. We've got the TV televangelists that have to have their own private jets to go somewhere to minister to whoever or whatever, poor group at the Hilton in Paris, compared to the people doing the real legwork that are walking 30 miles in the mud in wherever, and it's the same kind of thing. That, see, I'm trying, and no, that is not this. And we still get confused about that today.
Yeah, they again, I've said it before. Human nature hasn't changed from the beginning of humans, and it won't change. And you'll have the same people doing the same wicked things till Christ comes back, and we shouldn't be surprised by it, at all. We sometimes surprised because we think, oh, I thought they were, trying to do better than that. And maybe get surprised by people, but we shouldn't be surprised by wickedness and the things that people do overall. Somebody have a hand?
We probably need to make the point that the other true apostles were not doing this.
Doing what?
Yeah, when it talks about the super apostles, I don't think that's talking about John, Peter.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't either. No, I don't think they're going out and talking about how great an apostle they are. And by the way, I take cash or credit, I come speak to you kind of thing. Yeah.
Christ crucified.
Yeah, and to the point where it brought James up earlier, the brother of Jesus, during the time Jesus was here in all the Gospels, we don't see him mentioned at all. And so some point between Jesus' resurrection, James really, he became one of the strongest leaders in Jerusalem of the church. Mm-hmm. So he certainly wasn't going around saying, well, hey, everybody else listen to me because I'm the brother of Jesus. We have no record, no indication of that at all. And he probably underplayed that, if anything. But he was very strong, and he certainly wasn't doing it. He wasn't doing it for the fame. They just crucified his brother. He wasn't needing the attention. So again, Paul's motives are way different than who he's talking about here. Verse 13, he says, for such men are false apostles. Flat out, he says it. They're false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. Deceitful workmen. Probably everybody here has had some need of your car getting worked on or your house needing repairs or whatever, and had somebody, I worked with somebody come through, they had, a problem with their air conditioner, and they said they were going to need to spend $7,000 on a new coil system or whatever in their air conditioner. Another guy comes through and says, oh, you need this part. I'll go to Tulsa and get it, and comes back and fixes it, and it's $600. That's what's going on here. These guys come in, these false apostles come in and say, you know what, for I'll make you a deal. For this price, I can teach you how to be saved. Because I'm a really good apostle. I'm bonded, whatever they'll say for construction people, and then they'll rob them blind and lead them straight to hell with their teachings. And then meanwhile, the true apostle is here, comes in and just says, I know what you need. Here's the true gospel for you to be saved. And I'm not in it for the money. And so that's where Paul's at. He's calling him a deceitful workman. And he says, verse 14, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. I love how he says the first part there. He says, and no wonder. You could say, and no surprise, because even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. We should not be surprised by wicked people and wicked schemes and all of those things, because Satan's around it. Satan's behind it. He tries to disguise himself as an angel of God. And his followers and his minions are all going to do the same thing. Some people knowingly, some people unknowingly. Some people think they're kind of sort of doing the right thing. And some people are just wicked, and they want to be wicked. The end result is the same. Wickedness reigns if we allow it. So he says, Satan disguises himself as his angel of light. So it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as serpents, or as, Freudian slip there, as serpents, as servants of righteousness, and their end will correspond to their deeds. So his servants also disguise themselves. It's the wolf in sheep's clothing. And Paul's talking about it earlier. People will come into the church to destroy it. Will come in as wolves in sheep's clothing to destroy the church. It's not an accident that they do that. It's because they're serving Satan, and they disguise themselves the same way as he does to bring destruction. And can he harm God? Can Satan defeat God? No. But I'm convinced that when people are lost and led astray and they're lost, that hurts God. He wants everyone to be saved. And it hurts him for people to be lost. And that's the only way Satan can get at it. And so what's he going to do? He's going to do the best he can to get as many people lost as possible to hurt God.
Paul explained it to the elders that it would even come from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where that same section where you talk about coming in into the church to destroy it, and as wolves in sheep's clothing, they come on purpose. It's on purpose. So, but their end will correspond to their deeds. So, but they'll get what they have coming in the end.
The most dangerous thing that a lot of times, I don't think that somebody says, hey, I'm going to go and serve Satan and destroy the church. Ooh, that's not, they think that they're doing something right, or, they're misled, kind of like Saul was misled before the road to Damascus, or whatever, but they're preaching a different Jesus, and, they're not going out saying, hey, I'm going to mislead as many Christians as I can and send them to hell, but they're, they have a pure heart in the sense that, they're not trying to do good. They're not thinking they're serving Satan, and those are the most dangerous people, I think.
Yeah, they think they're serving an angel because he appears as an angel of light, and he must be good. And they, like you said, they think they're doing the good thing. And I would say most of the bad teaching and everything and all that comes from people in that case. They think they're trying to do good. And it's not pure, like we were saying earlier here, where he says a pure devotion. If their devotion was pure, I'm convinced that they will find the right path.
Well, they're easy to recognize too. These are prideful people. These are people that are looking for financial gain. They're people that's wanting to run it like a business.
especially nowadays. Um, so many of these big mega churches and whatever you want to call them, they're certainly a business. When you have a bunch of accountants and lawyers on staff, you're not there to preach the gospel. So those are all things to look for. So we'll pick up there in verse 16 next week. Appreciate all the comments.